Welcome, Dr. Shane here. Hey, I wanted to touch on a topic that it really is one of the more powerful and well-researched areas of the microbiome and our health and wellness. And that topic, although it's a really in-depth topic, I wanted to get you excited about it today because not only has there been a lot of research done in this area, but in fact, it goes back, it has a really rich history, and that topic is called the gut-brain axis. And central to the gut-brain axis is the vagal nerve, and we'll get into that in a second. But looking back in history, the association of gut disorders and psychiatric disorders have been well established since the 4th century in China. So the Chinese Materia Medica had created a product which is called yellow soup, and it's really one of the first, I hate to say this, but it's the first version of what we call a oral fecal transplant. From a healthy donor was turned into a soup, and then it was consumed by people that were suffering from things like anxiety, depression, and other psychiatric issues. You fast forward, and even in the early 20th century, so in 1910, a psychiatrist researcher named Phillips discovered that using fermented foods, specifically lactobacilli species, that it was a very effective treatment, again, for some of the psychiatric issues like depression, anxiety, and so on. That information was lost for a long time, and then as the emergence of the microbiome came out, it became really evident early on that the microbiota and the brain were in constant communication. And in comes the vagal nerve. So the vagal nerve is a really thick bundle of nerve cells, neurons that reach from the brain all the way down and innervate the entire digestive tract. And 80% of those nerves are what we call afferent, meaning they send messages back to the central nervous system or the brain. And only 20% of that nerve bundle is dedicated to the efferent or efferent, which send messages down to the intestinal or the digestive tract. So it's a huge nervous system that coordinates and communicates and assesses the state of our digestive tract and the microbiota that reside there. And in fact, in many ways, it controls it. So it becomes a central part of what we call the gut-brain axis. And it's important to realize that this bidirectional relationship isn't simply just communication. It actually creates cause and effect, meaning that when the vagal nerve isn't functioning properly, there's a disruption in the information, and in turn, the microbiota of people that have a low functioning vagal nerve tend to be in a more dysbiotic state. Their microbiota is not as healthy, it's not as happy, it's not as diverse. And that leads, of course, to many potential issues regarding our microbiota that we'll talk about in every scenario that the microbiota has a role in our health. Now, conversely or likewise, the health of the microbiota maintains the health of the vagal nerve as well as the central nervous system, because it communicates curiously. Now, this is a really fun little area that's going to be just blowing up in research and in the health and wellness world of the gut-brain axis and the connection between the gut and the psychiatric issues that we face. Meaning that these microbes produce a number of metabolites, and there's little cells that line our digestive tract that are called neuropods, and these neuropods are capable of sending a direct message. So our microbiota can produce neurotransmitters, what we call neurological cytokines and so on, not cytokines, but neurological modulators. And we know them as GABA, epinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, and that's just the beginning. There are more yet to be discovered. And these compounds then can connect and directly communicate with our brain through the vagal nerve receptors in these neuropods. Now, two other areas that in fact our microbiota communicate to our brain are through endocrine systems. So there's neuroendocrine cells, enteroendocrine cells, and then finally through an immunological mediator. So our immune system can measure the behavior of our microbiota and then send messages to the brain. So it's a phenomenal system that's being daily understood better. But bottom line is, there are a few, I guess, take-home messages that I want to leave you with, and that is, we can control many of our psychological needs through a healthy gut microbiota. And there's ways to do that, and one involves the vagal nerve. So having a healthy vagal nerve controls not only the type of microbiota, the complexity, the health of it, the wellness, the type of organisms, the ecosystem, etc., but it also then controls things like our gut permeability. So a healthy vagal nerve controls certain modulators that then control our leaky gut or our permeability. So it's directly connected to those two physiological functions and many more. The microbiota can either be modified, because in psychiatric challenges, the associated microbiota is always in more of a state of dysbiosis. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are these interventions that were discovered centuries ago, as well as in the 20th century. We now have a plethora of data describing how certain organisms being introduced as probiotics can alleviate, as they go in and modify our microbiota and make it healthier, they can alleviate things like depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric issues. So it's a really powerful tool for people trying to modulate and improve anything that is related to psychiatric dysfunction. That's tool number one. Tool number two is keeping the health of your vagal nerve. So how do we measure it? One way to measure it is heart rate variability. If you're not just looking at symptoms and or microbiota alone, heart rate variability can be used to understand your vagal nerve function. Secondly, deep, slow breathing. That has been shown to modulate a more healthy vagal nerve. An unhealthy vagal nerve has the impacts on the microbiota, but also has very many physiological impacts. It can impact our cardiovascular. It certainly is a measure of how much anxiety and depression and other psychiatric issues start to come into a stronger play or a greater issue in someone's life. So those two combinations of the gut-brain axis are where we can focus with interventions like probiotics that we know modulate and vagal nerve stimulation. And from that, I thank you for your time and talk to you next time.